and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection, the podcast that works to connect the world of behavior analysis and the world of education. We focus on topics important to behavior analysts who work in the public schools and those who support them. Join us and spend time gaining insights and ideas as our host talks with fellow behavior analysts as well as other experts in the field.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Behavior Education Connection. I'm your host, Dr. Selena Layden. So welcome to our next episode. This morning we have with us Hannah Johnson and Alicia Faller from Rockingham Public Schools. Good morning, ladies.
Hey, great to be here.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining me. I wanted to just take a minute and actually let you introduce yourselves, and then we'll move on to our topic. But Hannah, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Hannah Johnson, and I'm one of the 4 BCBAs in Rockingham County Public Schools. I got my undergrad degree in psychology from Goshen College in Indiana and master's degree in school psychology from James Madison, and did my verified course sequence through FIT online, along with my independent field work and more in a mental health setting. And so I've got a nice kind of combination of schools, mental health, and behavior analysis.
Great, thank you. Alicia.
Hi, I'm Alicia Faller. I got my undergrad degree at WVU, and I got my graduate degree in behavior analysis from James Madison University. And I have a background of private day placement and working in-home with parent training and working with children with autism.
And now you're both with Rockingham County Public Schools. So we are super glad to have you today. Today, we're actually going to talk about how do you go about defining your role as a behavior analyst when you work in a public school? A lot of us, and I'll throw myself in the hat, when we start in public schools, sometimes schools don't know exactly what they want, or they think they know what they want and they're not exactly sure what they're asking for, or they just don't know the full realm of what a behavior analyst can do. And so oftentimes I think it's left up to us to kind of carve out what we do and how we do it. So I really appreciate you both being here with me today to talk about this. I think it would help if you don't mind giving us a little bit of information about your school system.
Sure. We are probably considered a medium-sized school division. We have about 11,000 students, a little over 10% identified with IEPs, and we're in a rural district, meaning that our schools are really separated by geography. So we have 4 different attendance areas based on high school, and each one can take between the furthest points in the county, it can take 45 to 50 minutes to drive between.
Yeah, which I appreciate that. I think that can be a challenge in and of itself, having that much geographical distance, huh?
Mm-hmm. But I will say I feel like it's pretty surprising in the rural district that we have that our superintendent is so kind of future focused and interested in database decision making and technology. And so he's come on board within the last, I believe, 4 or 5 years. And so we have kind of this really future focused database tech interested superintendent in a rural school division. And so it's been a really fun combination of factors.
Yeah, one of the things I will just say to point this out, it's pretty incredible that you all have, you said 4 behavior analysts in your district, given that you are a rural district and you're not a super big district either. So first of all, just kudos for having that, because I know it's nice to not have to work by yourself for sure.
It's very special. I worked by myself for a while, and now feeling like I feel so blessed to have 3 other behavior analysts. I feel very lucky.
Well, it didn't happen by accident either. The big reason that we got to transition from 2 behavior analysts to 4 behavior analysts is because Alicia took initiative to go meet with Dr. Scheichel and say, hey, this is a behavior analyst. He gave an introductory PD. I don't know. Do you want to tell the story, Lish?
So he was giving a talk at one of the elementary schools and was talking about trauma-informed care and different strategies for kind of creating a trauma-informed care like safe spaces in the schools and how we can just really create like evidence-based strategies for working with students that are coming from, at-risk homes. And just saying, anyone who has ideas about this, just come talk to me. And so I really just took them up on it and said, Hannah, he said to come talk to us. So I'm really going to go do it. And I went and talked to him and said, we're doing this. We're working on this. We're doing this in special education. We've been doing it. And I'd love to talk to you about different strategies for general education. We're happy to collaborate. And he was really interested and really glad that we came and talked to him. And so we put together a proposal for what it would look like to have more behavior analysts and more mental health and behavior support throughout the division.
Well, that's certainly exciting and just awesome that you have supportive leadership like that. It actually kind of leads me into our discussion today, which I'm going to start out with a seemingly basic question, but I think it's actually relatively complex. But what does it mean to be a behavior analyst in a school division?
Yeah, it's one of those things that on the surface, you're like, well, I could just read you my job description.
Right.
But each bullet point under your job description could be its own job if you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But the way that we conceptualize it is that it is many things at one time, where you have to be prepared to meet any situation with what it needs in terms of support and intervention, whether that's a student crisis or working directly with a paraprofessional, speaking to the superintendent directly or any directors, and maybe all in the same day. And always keeping in mind your grounding in the science of behavior. And so it's having I feel like a pretty clear grounding in your theoretical orientation and your technical skills, and then figuring out how to apply that at any different level, at any different time, in any different situation, constantly.
Yeah, you bring up this really good point, and I want to hear what you have to say about it too, Alicia, but the school setting is just such an applied setting, right? Just more so than I think a lot of other places where behavior analysts work. And so you're right, just remembering what our roots are and what our science is, but doing that in such a unique setting that just has so many variables that you probably may or may not have been prepared for. But Alicia, yes, I want to hear what you want to say about it too.
Yeah, I mean, I love this question because I feel like it's such a huge responsibility. And it's when I went to a great example is I went to ABAI autism in Miami, and every person I met, they were doing in-home work, they were in a clinic, and anytime they heard that I was working in schools, they were like, oh, wow, we need more of you. That's great. I mean, it was just such like a mysterious job that I had, and they were great. They were excited to hear about it, but they were kind of like, that's your job and that's awesome. We need more of you. I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. And anytime we talk about ethical considerations and how we deal with them, the schools are the Wild West. That's how I describe them to other professionals and other behavior analysts. But you really are, like, you're an agent, like Hannah said, you're an agent of change on so many different levels. So, whether it's working with individuals and giving them different skills and knowledge to develop their skills and their attitudes, and then also working with the division, it's just such a great responsibility and an honor, because you're not just working with one individual student on, their functional language skills. You're working with teachers and administrators and potentially division leaders and superintendents on a mindset that could change the lives of hundreds of people.
Yeah, I love that thought, right? Like it's not an easy job to be a behavior analyst in a public school. But I think there are a lot of potential rewards in doing it. I know that was my experience, and I hope it's certainly yours. But so when you all started in your role, was your role defined for you? How have you taken that role and kind of crafted it into what you want it to be? I'd love to hear more about that.
So behavior analysts started in Rockingham County, and I tried to fact check this before we came on, but I think it was the early 2000s is a great way to put it. It's somewhere between 2002, 2004 with Commonwealth Autism Services.
So like a contract service,
A
basically.
contract service. And they were very clear about having them, having us embedded with Rockingham County. And the role back then was a coaching position, working to build capacity throughout the division, and also it's still a large part of our role working with high needs special education classrooms. So Hannah, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that, but when I came in, our role was very much working with high needs special education classrooms, which is still our primary role. But we've really always had this vision of building capacity and sustainability within the programs.
And even then, we've been able to expand on that because we used to be kind of confined to very specific classrooms that met a certain set of criteria. And that was a great way to get started and to build value in behavior analysis, often pretty restricted to autism services right at the beginning.
Sure.
And that was a great way, like I said, to get in and to build value. And over time, we found that that service, while really, really important, was not adequately meeting the needs of the division that we could meet based on the scope of our training. And so we said, hey, we can do more to help more people. And so we've been able to expand it from there. And now we work with all level 2 SPED classrooms, kind of in different capacities based on a variety of variables, and other students as well, as and do division-wide training opportunities and things like that. So the role was pretty well defined, and we have found opportunities since then to kind of build on that original framework and expand on it. So it's kind of like yes and no. It was not defined in the way that we do it now, but it was pretty well defined in a way that met the needs at the time.
Gotcha. And that makes sense. So you've definitely grown the role, it sounds like, which is great. So let's just put this out there. We are all behavior analysts. And so the question comes down to what behavioral strategies are you using to grow your role and define your role?
So we try to take a systems view as much as possible and utilize a lot of strategies from the OBM literature to think about the multiple contingencies in place that are kind of maintaining different behaviors at the systems level. So what is reinforcing this system? What is reinforcing that system? And thinking about it strategically from an OBM perspective and utilizing that information to then say, okay, this is how we could potentially impact this system. So for example, if we're going to talk about how to give support to kids that are in acute crisis or who are not being sufficiently served at a school-based level, we looked at that system and said, okay, what's reinforcing that system is that a kid is in crisis and a teacher reaches out for help, and there maybe is or isn't help based on who knows who and who, like not randomly, but who knows who to email to get the help that they need, and they either get it or they don't. And there's not a lot of reinforcement for teachers or administrators to reach out systematically because there's not a guarantee of who's going to come, do what, when, where, why, for whom, and how. And so we've been working really hard to define that process and work within the tiered systems of support to look at that system and make sure that the teachers, the administrators, the students, the parents are reinforced for reaching out for help from people who have the training and the ability to help the kids, and then making those people available. As a little bit of a tangent, but really thinking about it from a behavioral standpoint, far above just behavioral interventions at the student level. That's kind of the bare minimum, to be honest with you. We're really talking about the behavior of the entire system, of ourselves within the system, and all of the people that make up the system.
Well, and you brought up something that I think a lot of people deal with this, even if they're not in a school, but especially in a school. This idea of we absolutely want to reinforce people for reaching out and telling us what they need, especially early, because we know the earlier we can get into a classroom, the better it is for everybody, including the student. But sometimes that leads us to kind of a firefighter model, right? Like there's a fire, call Hannah, call Alicia, they'll come in, they'll take care of it. And that's not the end goal ultimately. So how do you, I mean, that's part of the job. I don't think we ever completely get away from that. But what do you do to help avoid getting there when we can?
So I know I just talked a lot, but I like this. So let's just cut me off at any point, honestly. But I like to build on this metaphor to talk about how we approach these two things at the same time, much in the same way that firefighters do. So we view you do have to respond to acute situations to make sure that the students and the teachers get the support that they need in the time that they need it to keep people safe and to keep kids in schools in a safe way. At the same time, and this is where we try to spend the bulk of our time, especially in the level 2 classrooms, we're doing like forest management, right? So you're keeping the brush clear, you're teaching teachers evidence-based strategies for classroom management, for working with kids with disabilities, for using data to drive decision-making and programming, so that if a fire happens, the entire forest is not flammable.
I think that's a great metaphor, actually. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't know a whole lot about firefighting, but I think it's a great metaphor in talking about it, right? You know, I tried for much of my career to not be the firefighter. And what I learned is you're always going to have that as part of your role because things pop up that we just couldn't predict for whatever reason. Kid shows up day one and we've never seen them before, and now somebody needs help, and you know, things happen. But reducing the time you're spending doing that work so that you can increase the time you're spending doing the other work, right? Doing the professional development and the training and helping people feel comfortable and confident in their skills so that it doesn't have to be an Alicia or a Hannah or a behavior analyst who has to do the implementation here.
Right, exactly. And I keep forgetting that we're on a podcast and I'm like nodding vigorously. But Hannah's the queen of metaphors, and that's a great one. Hannah comes up with them on the spot, like the forest. That's amazing. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like clearing the brush. And then in addition to that, when you go into firefight, one, you have to see it as you have value. These people are calling you because they see value in what you're doing, and that's a great thing. If people aren't calling you to firefight, there's a problem. I mean, you don't want to be called all the time. That shouldn't be the bulk of your responsibilities, but every now and then you are going to be called for these things, and continuing to show up for staff and for leadership in that way, that's important. That keeps that relationship. And secondly, having a clear process for how to get that access to that support, like Hannah was saying, and having a clear procedure for what happens when you get there. So when I get there, I'm going to do this. It's going to look like this. We're going to work on this. And this is when I leave. That creates that consistency where the firefighter, it's no longer a thing, because I know, like, when I call Hannah, she's going to do this process and then she's going to leave and I will have these skills. And it feels less chaotic and more of, this is how we do things.
Yeah, I think you all have talked about this, but to put it in words, it's having like systems within your systems, right? So there's the big system of how things work in a school. But then how do you access those services and supports? What happens once you have access to them? Having a plan for how we're going to support people. And then I very much agree, having a plan for exiting, right? Because your job is not to stay with that student forever. And that's something that is, I mean, behavior analysts shouldn't stay with their clients forever, but a lot of times in other settings, we do stay with clients longer. Where in school settings, I think a lot of our job because our client usually isn't directly the student, right? Our client is often the teacher or the other staff that are working with them. So our job isn't to stay there forever. Our job is really to get them what they need to be successful and then fade out.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I love that you brought up the client, because that shifts all the time. We're constantly having to say, okay, who is my client in this situation? And almost always it's the teacher, it's the staff, it's the parent, we need to give them these skills. And Hannah and I say all the time, like, if our intervention or our procedures that we're giving them don't work, then it's not working. We say, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And our job is to make it so that this is something that works in the classroom. This is a set of tools. This is a procedure that is perfect for this teacher. And if it's not working, then it's not working. It's not effective. And that's on us. And it's something we have to switch up.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you kind of a different question, but I'm curious. So if you could go back in time before you started in your current positions or as you were starting, and give yourself some advice or words of wisdom, what would you say to your former self now that you've kind of gotten to this point where you've defined your role to what it is today?
So I would say to myself that it is a good idea to have a lot of patience. And that you can do many things at one time. You can work on the kind of day-to-day level while preparing and addressing the systems change elements that you would like to do. Alicia and I were talking before the podcast about how we would encourage our former selves to kind of stay the course. Like it will pay off, and that it is worth much more of your time to think about ways that you could be effective in an ideal world and write them down and begin to work towards them, than to just talk about constantly why this can never work, why the teachers won't do your interventions, why the division just doesn't understand your value, why this is so hard, because all of those things are true. But we know that we have the tools to impact them. And so you do it at the same time. And so I would tell my former self, like, you're doing the work, keep going.
I like that. Alicia, do you have words of wisdom for your former self?
I agree with that. And that is the work. And I think we're both, I feel so lucky to work with Hannah, because we have very similar mindsets and visions for what our work is. But that is the work. The work is slow and it's hard. And, sometimes you get frustrated with the rate of change, but you have to just be creating these permanent products and, sitting in the lunchroom in the office, working on your business opportunity together for how you're going to change your role, and wanting to fight each other at 6 o'clock in the evening, because you're trying to be prepared for when the opportunity shows up, for when someone says, hey, can you do this other thing? What can you do? What else can you do? Can you do something other than coaching in these SPED classrooms? Rather than just being frustrated with where you are, create those permanent products, get ready for when that opportunity arises so that you can get after it. And because that is the work. It's not just creating tools for classrooms. It's not just working with students. The work is working to change how the division sees you, and working to change how the division sees behavior analysis and how they work with all students.
Mm-hmm.
I once had a former mentor tell me, you can't turn the Queen Mary on a dime. And school systems are very similar in that change doesn't happen overnight. And so I love the way that you both talk about, I think sometimes our day-to-day tasks feel like our work. And they are,
yes.
But really the bigger work is changing the system, and that doesn't happen overnight. So, so in that vein, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who is just starting out in the schools as a BCBA, what would you tell them?
So I am, like Lish said, a little bit into metaphors, and like corny quotes and stuff like that. So I thought I could share a couple of the quotes that I keep up in my office. And what she talked about a little bit, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. So that's from Seneca. And so just thinking about, you can always be preparing for the opportunity. That is not wasted time. It's not wasted effort. And it might take a while to be ready, but you can always be doing that. And the other quote that I really like is from Steve Jobs. And it's, some people say to give the customers what they want, but that's not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do. I think Henry Ford once said, if I'd asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. And we're not, in technology and we're not in marketing, but that really has a lot of functional applications too. People don't necessarily know how to ask. I think you started the podcast that way. They don't necessarily know how to ask for what they want out of behavior analysis for the school division. We have to be prepared to show it to them, to model it, to show up, and to keep showing up.
Yes, and in that same area, use permanent products and show and don't tell. Mm-hmm. Hannah has been so amazing at showing how we're going to do things. So don't just go in and say, hey, we'd really like to allocate our time over here. Show them how you're going to allocate your time. Print it in color. Show your data in graphs. We know this. We know that visual analysis and visual representation of our data is important, but it's really huge. And then the only other thing I would add is just learning the system, learning the culture, really getting to know the people around you. Mm-hmm. It's invaluable to this work, I think.
Well, ladies, I cannot thank you enough for joining me today. Hannah and Alicia in Rockingham, I think you all are just doing some great work, and I'm so thankful that you're able to share that with us today. Any final words before we sign off today?
I would like to give a couple shout outs if you don't mind.
Well, please do.
I'd like to say thank you so much to our two BCBA colleagues who joined us recently, Ansley Kaiser and Lisa Rhodes, who are not here today just because it's a shorter podcast, but they're doing amazing work right alongside us and really helping to push all of this work out and to help more students. And I'd like to thank our division superintendent, Dr. Oscar Scheichel, Director of Pupil Personnel, Scott Hand, Director of Student Support Services, Rebecca Hill-Shiplet, and our Director of Shenandoah Valley Regional Program, Jennifer Matheny. All of these people have been great in leadership and encouragement and opening the door and providing those opportunities and trusting us when we said, we would like to help in this area. Can we do it?
Any final words, Alicia?
I would just also like to thank you and the listeners.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us. We really enjoyed it.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you all for listening today. And we'll sign off. So thanks so much. Join us next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Behavior Education Connection. Join us next time for another great conversation about behavior analysis in the schools. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. Sending out a special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for supporting our work. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.